Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, this is the First Class Second Place podcast. I am your host, Jason Enrique, and welcome to the introduction episode. So when starting a podcast, the main question people ask is, what is the podcast about? Well, in the case of this particular podcast, it really doesn't have a label. It's more focused on a number of different topics such as movies, music, sports, current events, and other possible controversial conversations. Now, one thing that I can tell you is that the podcast will not be political or religious by any stretch of the imagination. Not so much because those are taboo subjects, but simply because when it comes to those particular subjects, I honestly don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Now, I understand that sometimes these subjects and conversations come up in everyday life, and in some cases, they become unavoidable. But you will not hear me come on this podcast and talk about who y'all should vote for, or which side is right or wrong, or whether or not I believe in a higher power, and the pros and cons of one's beliefs, and so on and so forth. Now, you may hear some satire and some sarcasm sprinkled from time to time, but that's just a part of my personality as far as just being human in general. Now, some people have asked me before, why do I do a podcast, and if I'm simply trying to join a bandwagon of content creators because that's the new wave. Well, everyone has an opinion, and everybody has the right to do whatever they want to do for whatever reason they want to do it. For me personally, it's all about fulfilling a dream of mine. You see, back in 2005, I started working as a delivery driver, and in those days, we didn't have access to Bluetooth to sync an iPod or an iPhone to a car. So the only way to pass time was listening to the radio. And per usual with terrestrial radio, you get sick and tired of the playlist pretty damn quick. So when I find myself listening to these DJs and radio personalities on air, next thing you know, I start mimicking and channeling my inner on-air personality. So I tried to see how to get on radio back then, and not only was I not able to afford school or airtime, but I also learned that the industry in general can be toxic. The competition is cutthroat, and you could easily lose your career before it even begins if your ratings are in the toilet, or God forbid you say something too controversial and now you're part of cancel culture. And sometimes you may even achieve the success and greatness that comes with it, but it can come at too great a cost, too many sacrifices that may not be even worth it. Fast forward to today, though, we now have access to different mediums of entertainment, and this podcast is basically me being able to bring you a show that I've had in mind for over 15 years without censorship and not having ratings determine my passion. Now, on the podcast, you will hear a ton of guests that I feel need more recognition for their work and the projects, as well as giving you a piece of their personality, and possibly even relate to them. Whether they're on promo mode or just in the mood for a good conversation, there's something for everyone here. Another question I get asked is the meaning behind the title First Class Second Place. Well, off the top of my head, the only example that I can give is the NBA team, the San Antonio Spurs. And the Spurs have always been a first-class organization, 5 championships, a Hall of Fame head coach, legendary players, great fan base, but yet they're not as flashy and not in the conversation as other organizations with more popular social media and have less accolades and accomplishments to their name. So the approach with the title is basically having an underdog mentality. That's also a mentality for a guy from Jersey. There's an underdog quality that comes from being from Jersey, especially when everything else in the tri-state area is centered around New York. But Jersey is a low-key great state, and I'm proud to be from Jersey, and I'm very unapologetic about that shit. So I hope you enjoy the podcast. Please subscribe and support. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. I definitely want to give a shout out and thank you to everybody who has been supportive since day one. Everybody knows who you are. Thank you so much. Looking forward to having more conversations with you. I love y'all, and I'll talk to you next time.